Welcome to Write Now with Scrivener, where writers talk about how they work, how they develop their ideas, and how they use Scrivener, the app built for long-form writing projects. I'm your host, Kirk McElhern, author of Take Control of Scrivener. Today I'm very happy to welcome S.J. Watson, the author of the international bestseller Before I Go to Sleep. Steve, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
I really want to know why you call yourself S.J. Watson instead of Steve. I mentioned your name to someone a couple days ago, and they thought that you were a woman because a lot of women use their initials in their names.
Yeah.
Why did you choose that?
Well, really, it was because when I was on submission with Before I Go to Sleep, which, as you probably know, is written in the first person, but from a woman's perspective, my agent felt it would be quite good to obscure slightly the fact that I was male. I mean, I haven't gone out of my way to hide anything. You know, I've got a beard and I have photos taken and stuff. You know, I'm not. But it was a way of just divorcing the person that wrote the book from the book, I suppose. And I kind of enjoyed that too, because especially back then, I mean, less so now, but especially back then, I was quite a shy person. So it was quite helpful for me to be able to have that distinction between S.J. Watson, the author, and Steve, the guy.
So I had a guest on the podcast a couple months ago, and we were talking about writers developing a career. And she said something like, a lot of writers think that they'll write a first novel, sell millions of copies, have a major motion picture made from their novel. But the odds of that are like being struck by lightning. How did it feel when you were struck by lightning?
It was great. No, it was, I mean, what can I say? It was amazing. It was surreal. It was, I completely understand that take of it being like, it feels like I won the lottery. I mean, it's not winning the lottery. I mean, I put a lot of work into the book, but still, you know, there's an element of luck. Things have to line up and they did. I never dreamt. My biggest ambition when I was writing Before I Go to Sleep, I knew I was on something good. I think I knew I was writing better than I ever had before. And I think I knew that this was my best shot at being published. And so I suppose I was, hopeful that I might be able to walk into a bookstore and see my book on a shelf. But the thought of it being in the charts at number one on that shelf were not even in my head, and certainly I never even considered that I might one day be, sat opposite Nicole Kidman at a film premiere. So it was, what can I say? It's an amazing, wonderful, surreal experience. Not without its stresses, but they're
I can imagine, yeah,
luxury stresses. So I'm not going to complain about them.
That puts you on quite a stage, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How do you learn to negotiate that? I mean, if I understand correctly, you were working as an audiologist in a hospital. Kind of like a boffin type job, right? And then all of a sudden you're in the limelight.
It was a very sudden and very complete change in my life, really, financially, certainly, in terms of my day job was suddenly my hobby, or vice versa, whichever way you want to think about it. And that was probably the most difficult thing to negotiate in a way, because I had no experience of that. I was used to the writing being an escape from the stresses of work and an escape from the stresses of life, I suppose. And then suddenly that wasn't the case anymore. And, it's a wonderful thing. It's that cliche about if you're doing a job you love, you never really work another day in your life. And I haven't dreaded a Monday morning in over 10 years now, which is great. But it does mean I had to find inner resources to manage my own time that perhaps, there must have always been there, or else I wouldn't have got the novel written in the first place. But suddenly, I had deadlines suddenly, and I had agents and editors, and it was no longer just a happy hobby that I escaped to, every now and again, well, very regularly, in fact, but, it became something else. So, no, but it was great.
So how did you start writing? What got you into writing in the first place?
Oh, God. Well, I mean, probably like every guest you've ever spoken to who's an author, I've written my entire life, more or less. I've always loved books as long as I remember. And it's always been my dream and my ambition, really. I remember being at school and being asked what I wanted to do when I grew up. And, I said I wanted to write novels and write stories and have books published. And then whoever I was speaking to kind of probably laughed politely and said, well, why didn't you get a real job instead? But it wasn't always there. I've always, to a greater or lesser, there have been some quite long periods in my life when I've not written very much at all, but it's always been there. I've always been somebody who had a notepad and jotted things down at the very least. And, and I would try short stories and, going back literally pretty much as long as I remember, I've always wanted to do it and I've always dabbled. And I think what happened was that I just reached a point sort of in my mid to late 30s when I just started to take it a bit more seriously. And I realized that, if I wanted to have a book published, I was going to have to sit down and put the work in it. It wasn't going to just happen. And even with jotting things down in notebooks and stuff, I still needed to actually, sit down and learn the skills and put the work in, put the hours in. So, but it's always been there.
So you signed up for a course with the Faber Academy, which is a writing course run by the publisher Faber and Faber. I believe you signed up to the first course they did. Is that correct?
Almost. They'd done a few weekend courses and shorter courses, but it was the first it was a 6-month course. It was only one session a week, but it was the first kind of longer course that they'd run. And
did this kind of get you into that rhythm of writing and putting the words on the paper regularly?
Yes, I think it gave me many things, but one of the big things was it gave me that structure. I was in a relatively small group and each of us shared work, chunks of work with each other regularly. And so, I had those kind of deadlines to get another 5,000 words written by, in 3 weeks' time or whatever. So that helped me to focus. But I think also it was the first time I'd sort of found my tribe, if you like. I'd done other courses, evening classes in writing, but most of the other students, they were people who, they'd maybe just moved to London and they wanted to do a few night classes and meet some people and that's absolutely fine. Of course it is. And there's an element of that for me as well. But this was the first time I was actually surrounded by people who felt as passionately about writing and about words and about stories that I did. And it felt, we encouraged each other and we, I think I learned probably as much in the pub after the sessions than I did during the sessions themselves, because we just chatted work and we chatted characters and we shared, we became very close very quickly because we shared so much. So yeah, I learned a lot on the course but it was about giving me focus. I think for me, that's what the course gave me.
And on the course, this is when you were writing before I go to sleep.
Yeah, I didn't complete it on the course. I wrote about, probably about 70% of the first draft on the course, which again, that was enormously helpful because I was showing the first chapter to people and they were intrigued. And it's always, it's obviously very affirming if you show people whose opinions you trust and they're very positive. It kind of drove me to, it made me realize I was on to something. I was on the right track. So I worked on Before I Go to Sleep on that course.
It's one of those novels with a simple idea. And if anyone hasn't read the book, it's about a woman who wakes up in the morning and she finds out she has amnesia. So she'll remember things during the day, but when she goes to sleep, she loses everything. And there's this process where she starts to remember what happened in the past. I reread the book a few weeks ago. I think I read it shortly after it came out. I watched the movie again last night, and the movie is, this adjective gets thrown around too much, but the movie truly is Hitchcockian. You get that feeling that it's greatly influenced by Hitchcock, but it's the simple idea is often more powerful in a novel than a complex idea. How did you come up with this idea about memory? Now, if you were an audiologist, wouldn't you have thought about someone who's lost their hearing?
Well, you might think so, but one of the things, what happened was I'd been accepted onto the Faber course and I knew I wanted to be starting a new project rather than trying to finish a book I'd been working on previously. I wanted to start with a blank slate and I thought I'd learn more from doing that. So I was looking for ideas. I'm always looking for ideas, but I was actively looking for ideas with a view to, I've got 3 weeks to find something I want to work on, or a month or whatever it was. And I read an obituary of a man called Henry Molaison who died, and he died in his 80s, having suffered with very severe anterograde and retrograde amnesia for all of his adult life, essentially. And I just had this mental image of somebody who woke up at the age of 80 something, and their most recent memory was from their teen years or whatever. And that just struck me. And I thought, I wonder, there's a character. There's a novel there, but there's a character there. And I wonder what could happen to that person. And weirdly, it was a woman I saw for some reason, although it was a male, a man's obituary that I read. I think it was just one of those moments where something connected in a way that I didn't necessarily understand at the time, but it obviously spoke to me. And I think you're right. I mean, part of the reason I never even considered writing about someone who lost their hearing was because it was too close to my day job. And first of all, my day job was something I kind of wanted to escape from. Not physically, but, when I came home, I didn't want to be spending even more time thinking about people with hearing problems. Yeah. But also, I kind of consciously, I thought I would write a better novel if I was writing something that was quite divorced from who I was as a person. So this kind of just, but those are all kind of intellectual or conscious reasons that I can attach after the fact. The fact is, at the time, it just felt like the right story. It felt like a good character to write, and lots of material there.
Well, we know the sort of truism that's bandied about, write what you know, yet it's not always the right thing to write about, because for you, it's still medical, right? So you still have that idea, but you didn't want it to be too close to what you were doing, because maybe you would have felt invested in a different way and you wouldn't be exploring it from the outside.
But I think write what you know, for me, that's more about, first of all, making sure that you know what you're writing in a way. So if you're writing about somebody, in a very different situation from you, do the research, make sure you know what you're talking about. And secondly, I also think it's about taking your own experience and filtering it. So, one example I used in my Substack newsletter is, if you're writing about someone being stranded on Mars, for example, you have never been stranded on Mars, so you can't speak from personal experience, but you probably have been in a situation where you felt lonely and isolated and cut off and a little bit lost, and you can use those experiences and just try and amplify them. So I think the whole thing about writing what you know, it's a bit sort of an oversimplified excuse that some people do. I mean, let's face it, if I'd have written what I knew, I would have written about a slightly bored and bald middle-aged audiological scientist living in London, wishing that he was a novelist, which nobody would have read.
Oh, you never know. You might have made something out of it. All right. We want to talk about The Experiment, which is, as your press release says, the UK's first open source novel written in real time. You're basically inviting everyone to participate in writing a novel. Is this like a wiki novel?
No, well, no. The idea is, I talk a lot in my Substack about writing a novel being slightly uncomfortable, and there's a David Bowie quote that I'm always coming back to, which is, and I'm obviously paraphrasing because I can't remember it word for word, but basically, in order to do good creative work, you need to be a little bit out of your depth. That's the place to do something really interesting when you're a little bit scared. And I talk about that a lot, that when, as a writer, I think that fear, it's not like, for me anyway, it's not like riding a bike where, you learn to ride a bike and then, hey, I can ride bikes now. It's I learned to write a novel. But the next novel isn't just as much fear that it's not going to work, or that, it's all going to fall apart in my hands. And I really, what I wanted to do with The Experiment was kind of demonstrate that by sharing the process, by sharing the draft. I'm writing a draft 0, which I call it draft 0 because I always say to people that you should never show anybody. This is the draft that you should write, knowing that no one's ever going to see it. But my plan is to publish it chapter by chapter on Substack.
One of my guests recently called that the vomit draft.
Yeah, that's
the one that you vomit out, but you don't want anyone to ever see.
Whether it's the vomit draft or the draft 0, whatever it is, it's about just splurging the words onto the page, knowing that no one's going to see them. But I am going to be showing everybody. And it's really as a way of just showing, look, this is, I think one of the big things about writing and novels, unlike, say, a symphony or a painting, is you can't see the work that's gone into it. If you listen to a piece of music, it sounds, you know, you can tell how good that person is at playing the violin or whatever it might be. Same when you look at a painting, you can see the artistry, you can see the years of practice. But when you read a novel or any piece of writing, in fact, that's good, it feels as though that's the only possible way that idea can ever be expressed because it's so perfect. And so therefore it kind of feels like a first draft. So the experiment is my way of basically sort of saying, look at my first draft, it's rubbish. Hopefully not too bad, but, you know, I want to show that it just because someone has you know, had a global bestseller and sold however many copies and had a film made, it doesn't mean that I just sit down and perfect prose flows effortlessly from my fingertips whilst I'm being fed grapes, unfortunately.
Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the experiment, and we'll talk about how you use Scrivener. Writing a book, screenplay, or even a long article is a juggling act. You need to find the right words and the right structure, keep track of research, and refer to notes. Tailor-made for long writing projects, Scrivener is the go-to app for writers of all types. Scrivener combines a typewriter, binder, and corkboard in a single app. A project outline makes it easy to get an overview of your work and flip between sections. Refer to research alongside your writing, and just drag and drop to rearrange your work. Write in any order in sections as large or small as you like, and let Scrivener stitch it all together when you're ready to share your words with the world. With Scrivener, you'll find everything you need to start writing and keep writing. Scrivener is available for Mac, Windows, iPad, and iPhone. Download the free trial from scrivenerapp.com. Right now, with Scrivener listeners can get a 20% discount with the coupon code PODCAST. That's scrivenerapp.com. So what is the experiment about? What's the plot?
What's the plot? Well, there is none at the moment. I've asked we're very early stages, and I'm already slightly behind because a few issues have come up over the weekend which have slightly thrown me. But that's part of the process. I think that's equally valid to just show to people, you know, I'm already late because life happens.
Because writers are always late.
Yeah. But, you know, it's just life happens, and I think, you know, you have to be in a certain frame of mind to write. Although I kind of resist that idea that the muse has to be with you, and you know, the sun has to be in the sky, and that you have to have the right pen or the right. I do have to have the right software, obviously, Scrivener, but anyway,
yep.
But beyond that.
And the right computer, and maybe the right music. I mean, we all have our tics, right? We all have things we have to have.
Yeah, exactly. But there is an element of you've just also got to just sit down and get it done. You know, a plumber can't refuse to come and fix your tap because the plumbing muse wasn't with them that day. You know, they've got a job to do, and it's to an extent it's the same with writing. Although
plumber is not a good example because they're hard enough to get.
Yeah, but you know, anyway. So a couple of about a week or so ago, I put out on my newsletter and on my social media about. I just asked people to suggest a starting point, whether that be a setting or a character name or a first line. And I've had quite a few, and actually the slightly difficult thing I've got at the moment is choosing. Several of them are sort of seem to be, they're giving me that tingle of something I'd like to explore. So my kind of challenge to myself at the minute is trying to decide which way to jump, which one to go for. So I haven't got any fixed ideas of where it's going to go and what the plot's going to be, or even what genre it'll be in. You know, I've always admired and envied those writers who say they just kind of get the tingle of an idea and they begin writing and see where it takes them. So this is probably going to be my attempt to do that.
Well, the first guest I had on this podcast, Peter Robinson, who passed away last year, and he told me that he would just start with a dead body and take it from there. Now, I'm sure the first few novels, it wasn't that easy, but after a while, he had his recurring characters, you know, the main detective and the minor characters. And after a while, it does flow in something like that when you're writing a series character.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I've just finished a book, in fact, which I'm anticipating at least being the first of a series. So I'm keen to see if I can do that. You know, as in if I can just kind of start with the body and see where it takes me. But those aren't the books I've written so far. So, Yeah, I've asked my followers and friends and fans and whatever you want to call them, people who are interested in my work anyway, to suggest where a starting point. And I'm the plan now is to write a first chapter and then to share it and then say, where do you think it should go? I was thinking it could go here, but where would you like it to go? Or have you got any ideas? And I reserve the right to disregard everyone's idea, of course. Anyone whose ideas I do use in any way, shape or form will get credit, obviously. If the book is eventually publishable and is published, they'll obviously get a credit in the book as well.
So how does one join this project? Because I definitely want to play along with this.
Well, it's all been run through my Substack, which is sjwatson.substack.com. Or I'm sure if you Google SJ Watson Substack, you'll get it. Or also there's a link on my website. So there's several ways, but it's been run through the Substack with, I'm kind of pushing it out through Twitter and stuff and Instagram and I haven't quite got to grips with TikTok yet, but that is in the plan in my head.
You don't have to do TikTok.
I know. It looks so much fun, but then I think I overthink everything.
Yeah.
I admire those people who just sit down and do it, but I tend to overthink. But yeah, mostly through Substack will lead you into then you can sort of access it from other places, but the Substack is the way to go.
Okay, so let's talk about Scrivener. Have you been using Scrivener since you started writing Before I Go to Sleep?
Yeah, before I go, I'd written at least one book on Scrivener before I go to sleep. It was unpublishable rubbish. Well, okay, it wasn't that bad, but it certainly wasn't something I would want out there in the world. So by the time I came to Before I Go to Sleep, it was at least the second full-length project I'd attempted on Scrivener. Probably, I've used it ever since, and I couldn't even imagine. When friends tell me they write on just straight onto Word, I always look at them in a kind of like, why would you do that? But
one of the things that I hear all the time in this podcast is I don't have to scroll with Scrivener. And that's one of the biggest things. The way the binder is set up, I'll let you explain it in a second. The way the binder is set up, when you want to find something you've written earlier in your manuscript, you don't have to scroll and try to find it.
Yeah, exactly. You just go, oh, there's chapter 3. Click. Yeah. There's chapter 3. I just find it helpful in so many ways. I mean, not least of which is, that literally everything to do with a novel is in one file. I haven't got to think, oh, okay, where did I save that? And I'm sure I've got that bit of research saved. Is it in this folder or that folder? Or is it on my desktop? Or did I, it's all in one place, which I find, including all the drafts as well, so it's not like you've got to hunt around your hard drive finding that great idea that you had.
When you were working on Before I Go to Sleep, did you plot this out in advance, or did you at each chapter, because each chapter is a new day and the character wakes up not remembering anything. So it's like you're starting over again, right? Yeah,
no, I didn't plot it out in advance. And I had, obviously I had the character in her initial situation, and I kind of knew, not the end of the book, but the twist, without giving anything away, but the twist that's at the heart of the book. I'm sure what I mean by that, I'm sure. I had those two things, but I had no idea how I was going to get there. And the structure of it, the diary aspect of it came relatively, I kind of wrote quite a lot, sort of just going around in circles and realizing or thinking that I'd created an impossible task for myself. So no, I didn't plan it out. And on the one hand, there are probably tens of thousands of words that I wrote that I ended up scrapping because I essentially didn't have a plan. But on the other, I think if I had sat down to plan it, I probably would have tied myself up in knots, and then decided to abandon it and do something simpler. So I think it worked out okay that I didn't plan it, although it probably didn't make my life any easier.
Well, some authors I've talked to find that writing an outline means that they can do all the thinking and then do all the writing, but others don't want to be tied to that outline because every writer knows that as they're writing, the characters do things that they didn't expect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they don't want to be stuck in, chapter 11, I've said they're going to do this, whereas it prevents you from going off on an interesting tangent.
Absolutely. And that's what I find. I mean, now, now is it 13 years later, leaving aside the experiment, which, as I say, is going to be a week by week or a fortnight by fortnight, vomit draft. But With my kind of my other projects, I do a lot more planning. I don't plan in too much detail for that exact reason. I think in the writing things will suggest themselves, little ideas, little twists, little character quirks that maybe you weren't expecting. So I don't plan it too much, but I now know that there are certain things I need to have figured out before I start writing. And, not least of which is the beginning and the end and the midpoint, or there are a few,
the major plot points.
Yeah. And also there's a bit of sometimes there's a bit of background that in previous novels, I've kind of thought, I'll sort that out down the line. I don't quite know why she does this or why he does that, but I'm sure I'll figure it out. And now there are certain things, if I'm resisting figuring it out at the beginning of a project, it's probably because I need to. So it's worth. I love writing. I do love the physicality of putting. I love the physicality of typing on the keyboard. Would you believe? But I love seeing a book grow. Planning bores me slightly, but I've kind of gradually come to the realization that I need to do a bit of it, or else I end up going around in circles. And I'm getting to quite like the planning stages. I found little tricks, little ways that I can make myself quite enjoy it. So
I think John Irving said that he starts every novel with the first sentence and the ending and fills in everything. And that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. And what I heard, he said, and he knows the last line word for word, he knows the last line of the book, and it never changes. I find shocking. I can that surprises me, because I can kind of understand knowing the last line as in a place to aim for. And when you get there, you'll kind of, okay, it might not be exactly that. But no, he says it never changes, which is interesting.
So you are also into photography. Before we started recording, you said you like to use photography as a way to sort of jumpstart your creativity.
Well, yeah, I think for me anyway, but I think probably for all for all writers, I think it's quite important to have a creative outlet that isn't your day job. If that makes, and when, as I kind of touched on earlier, when writing became my day job, I think it ties in with it. When I was working as a clinical scientist, I was a person whose job was clinical scientist. I don't feel like I'm a person whose job is writer. I feel like I'm a writer. It's so bound up in who I am and my identity and my sense of self-worth and all of that it's important for me to have a creative outlet that isn't that. And when I started the photography, I do street photography, which, I'm sure you'll realize just means pounding the streets looking for interesting things and people to take photographs of. When I started that, it felt very much as just a kind of a hobby, but I didn't expect, but what I did find is that it does feed into the work, into the writing. But then I spent a bit of time thinking about that, and I realized it's because they're both kind of narrative arts in a way. With writing, I'm trying to create images I'm using a story to create images. With photography, I'm using images to try and tell a story. And so they do actually feed into each other in a way I wasn't expecting, but I do find very helpful.
Good photographs do tell stories, and all the well-known street photographers say that they try to tell stories in their photos. And if you're out in London, in the street, you're seeing people, and you're trying to capture something that sets off the idea of a story in someone's mind when they see the photo.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a way of trusting your instinct. Sometimes I'll see somebody or a scene or a moment. I think I want to capture that. That's a photograph there, and I wouldn't be able to tell you why that particularly appealed to me, or that person appealed to me, or that situation. And it's the same, I think, when I'm writing. Sometimes an idea or a character will just come, and I can't tell you at the time necessarily why they're the people I want to write about, why that kind of first line is the one that struck me. But you have to go with instinct.
Do the people you get in your photographs ever inspire characters?
Not directly, but I think it all feeds in. Yeah. I've never photographed anyone and thought, yeah, I want to write about you. But I think it's about, as well as anything, it's also about, I suppose, training that observing part of me. Looking for the moment, looking for the thing that they do, or the way they stand, or whatever it might be that sort of tells me something about them, which I suppose is also what I'm trying to do with with writing is trying to do that in reverse, is to try and create, describe a moment which will then unlock an entire character.
I like to ask my guests to recommend a book. Is there anything that you're reading now or that you've read recently that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I've recently read a book called it's called Conviction. It's by Jack Jordan's new one. It's very good. I really, really liked Erin Kelly's last one called The Skeleton Key. I think she's on a real run of very, very good books. And the last one in particular, The Skeleton Key, I did really enjoy. Yeah, that's my tip, I would say.
Okay, S.J. Watson, your new project is The Experiment, and I invite all our listeners to take part in this. Steve, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's been great.
If you like the podcast, please follow it in iTunes or your favorite podcast app. To learn more about Scrivener, go to scrivenerapp.com. Join us next month for another conversation on Right Now with Scrivener.